The U.S. and Israel coordinate attacks against Iran, launching a wave of missiles starting at 8:10 a.m. local time. Both the Iranian president and the supreme leader targeted in the first wave. U.S. President Donald Trump urges Iranians to rise up and seize control when military action is over. Iran has retaliated, launching ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, as well as U.S. military bases in the region. Explosions have been heard in Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi. At least one person has been killed from falling debris in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome to this special edition of Around the World with me, Catherine Viette. The U.S. and Israel have launched a coordinated daylight attack on Iran called Epic Fury. It began at 8:10 a.m. local time as Iranians were at work and at school. Airstrikes have hit targets across the country, including near the president and the offices of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in Tehran. U.S. President Donald Trump said this is the beginning of major combat operations against Iran and warned that American lives may be lost as a result. Iran's state media is reporting that one of the missiles launched by the U.S. Israeli attack hit a school in the southern part of the country. An Iranian official said the strike there has killed 51 students at a girls' elementary school, and another 60 students have been wounded. The regional governor for the Manab County said the death toll could rise. To get the latest on what's been happening, we can cross now to Tehran, speak to our correspondent there, Reza Saya. So, Reza, I just want to ask, how are you doing? Are you safe where you are?
It is safe where I am right now. It is certainly a grim day for the people of Iran, for the capital city of Tehran. Let me describe to you what's happening at this minute. It's a little after 4:30 p.m. local time on this Saturday. This is usually the first day of the work week, and at this time it's usually rush hour. So the city is bustling. Traffic is bumper to bumper. Right behind me is one of the major expressways of the city, but right now things are unusually and eerily quiet. As it seems that most people, after what unfolded today, have raced home to take some shelter, to figure out what happened, to figure out what's to come. Earlier this morning, beginning at around 9 o'clock, that's when the first wave of the attacks happened. I was home in the heart of the city here in Tehran. I was with my daughter. That's when I first heard 2 or 3 explosions. They were reminiscent of the explosions of the missile attacks that we heard back in June. I immediately knew that this was probably the attack. What I did was I took my daughter to a safe place with her mother, and then it was state media that gave the initial reports that an attack had targeted the offices of the supreme leader, the offices of the president. There was a thick plume of smoke in downtown Tehran. That's when the traffic jam were most intense. People were obviously racing home to get to safety. A number of people I saw on the streets were looking up in the air to see if they see anything. They were looking at their phones to figure out what was happening. A lot of people chasing down motorcycles to somehow get home. And an image that is with me at this point is so many parents racing to schools to get their children out of school, to get them to safety. The internet was initially shut off, but about an hour ago, I realized that the virtual private network that I usually use here is working. That was not the case during the 12-day war. So in what is somewhat of a surprising development, there is some access to the internet using a virtual private network. And as far as the state media goes, and as far as the government goes, their approach seemingly, based on everything we've read, is one, to calm people down, say everything is okay. There's reports that the president is okay. There's no reports on the whereabouts of the supreme leader. They have reported that the subway systems, the bus systems are free of charge in an apparent effort to help people to get to safety. And another thing that they've clearly done is report that Iran has launched a counter attack targeting Israel, targeting surrounding countries. The sun is going to set in a couple of hours. During the 12-day war back in June, most of the attacks came at night, and I'm sure a lot of Iranians are anxious to see if that happens again. When the sun goes down, there's going to be more missiles coming into Tehran and other cities throughout the country.
Now, Reza, we know that the United States has said that they plan on continuing combat operations. So what are the Iranian people prepared to do in the meantime? Are they going to spend time in bomb shelters, try to go about their daily life? What can we expect?
It's hard to say. First of all, there's not many bomb shelters here. And I think an option that people have here, and we saw that in June during the 12-day war, is to simply leave town. We expect a lot of people, traffic jams heading out to Tehran tonight, to the northern resort cities of the Caspian Sea. And I think a lot of people who don't have the opportunity to do that, who don't have a place to go, are just going to stay home and hope for the best. So I think an overarching feeling here is just uncertainty. If there are going to be more attacks, what are these attacks going to target? You'll recall that U.S. President Donald Trump, after the 12-day war in June, said that Iran's nuclear program was all but obliterated. So there's a big question: where are they going to attack? Are they going to attack government officials, military leaders? At this point, it's simply not clear, and I think a lot of people are very worried about what's to come, and at this hour, figuring out what the best way forward is for them.
Now, Reza, as you mentioned, those early strikes, they were targeting near the president's house, near the compound of the supreme leader. But Donald Trump also said, this is an opportunity when this is over for the Iranian people to rise up, seize their freedom. So obviously regime change there, a goal. What do the Iranian people think about that?
Iranian people don't have one voice. And I think one thing that I personally observed over the past couple of months in this information war is this narrative that all Iranian people want regime change. All Iranian people are desperate for U.S. military intervention. Is there a sector of the population that wants that? I would say yes. How big is that sector? Is it the majority? It is impossible to analyze that. It is impossible to assess that. We should stress that there's a big sector of the population that doesn't want military intervention, that sees military intervention, that saw this attack this morning as a violation of Iran's sovereignty, as a violation of international law. So are there people out in the streets right now? They're not. People, the streets are very quiet right now, and it remains to be seen in the coming hours what happens. We should point out that there was a text message a couple of hours ago from authorities, government text message, warning people, asking people that if anyone sees anything suspicious, any suspicious activity, to call police, to call the authorities. So that's an indication that government officials, authorities are preparing for a possible insurgency like we saw last month. According to the government, there were armed terrorist groups who came out and targeted police stations, targeted mosques, targeted public transportation like buses. Are we going to have a repeat performance over the next hours? I think that's another reason why people are anxious.
Reza, please stay with us for the moment. I want to introduce the other members who are in the studio here with me. I have Andrew Hillier from our International Affairs desk, and I also have Ershad Alajani from France 24's Observers desk as well. So, Andrew, I think you had a question.
Yeah, that's right. I'd just like to start by asking a question to Reza Sayar, actually, who is, of course, on the ground in Tehran. And Reza, how has the Iranian government been preparing for what's happening this morning? How have they been preparing for this scenario?
Well, I think militarily, what we've heard from government officials in the face of threats from U.S. President Donald Trump, Washington, that if there is an attack, the response from Iran is not going to be limited, that there's going to be an aggressive response, that it's going to be a regional response targeting U.S. forces, targeting U.S. allies. And I think, according to state media reports, we've already seen that. Reports of explosions in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. This is from state media. We haven't independently verified this, but if indeed this is true, it confirms what the Iranian government had been warning, that if there is an attack, that they're going to retaliate and they're going to target U.S. allies in the region. So that was their military approach, and it's unclear right now how expansive that response has been. It's hard to get information at this point, but I think in the coming hours, we're going to find out what that response by the Iranian government has looked like. And apart from the military response, obviously the government's position was, let's try diplomacy. Let's see if we can get a diplomatic solution. Of course, they've gone 3 rounds of indirect negotiations with Washington. There was scheduled to be another round of talks in Vienna. That is certainly going to be scrapped, and it's important to point out that this is the second consecutive time where Washington and Tehran had engaged in indirect negotiations. Iran's position was, let's give diplomacy a chance that an agreement is reachable. Both times during these indirect negotiations, without warning, the U.S. and Israel have attacked Iran.
Hey, Reza, stay with us. We're going to bring in someone else as well. We have a guest that we can bring in now, Yossi Coopervisor, excuse me, the former head of the IDF, Military Intelligence Research, and the former Israeli JCPOA negotiator. Yossi, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, as I just mentioned, you were one of the negotiators for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That's the 2016 Iran nuclear deal that Trump threw out. Now he's obviously a couple last days trying to renegotiate, but that ended in military strikes. So do you think those talks would ever have ended up being successful? And if not, why?
These current talks, I was very skeptical about the chances that these talks will be successful, because the utmost flexibility that the Iranians can show is not enough to satisfy the minimum demands of the Americans. The minimum demand of the Americans was that the Iranian will give up the nuclear project and give up enrichment of uranium, and the Iranians were not ready to do that. So this was going nowhere anyhow. And the Americans were trying to convince the Iranians to give up the enrichment of uranium, and the Iranians refused repeatedly. So it left both sides with no other option but to give up on the negotiations. It turned into something that just is being used by the Iranians in order to buy time, nothing more than that. And the Americans said enough is enough.
Yossi, so these previous strikes that we saw on Iran that were carried out in June by the U.S., they were limited in scope, limited to nuclear facilities there. This is currently a much wider operation. So why has the U.S. joined up with Israel?
Well, I'm not sure that they joined up with Israel. Both sides joined up with the other, and the same target of getting the Middle East rid of, and the Iranian people rid of this regime that just brings with itself terror and instability and bad things, and an attempt to become a nuclear power. And we tried for 47 years to accommodate this regime, and all we saw is havoc and problems all around the Middle East caused by this regime. So the outcome of that was that the Americans reached the conclusion that enough is enough, and this regime has to go. And since they cannot make the regime go by themselves, they just are determined to create the conditions to pave the road for the Iranian people to get rid of this regime. That's what they're trying to accomplish by this operation together with Israel.
Yossi, please stay with us for a moment. I just want to go back to Tehran and bring in our correspondent there, Reza Saya. So, Reza, at the moment we're discussing the diplomatic talks that obviously ended up in failure because the U.S. and Israel launched a military attack. There was concerns that Iran might have been trying to use this opportunity to stall. Do you agree with that assessment, or do you think the talks could have ended up being successful?
I think repeatedly the Iranian government showed flexibility, showed willingness to make concessions. They signed the 2015 nuclear agreement with all the world powers, what many see as an unprecedented agreement. That was ripped up by U.S. President Donald Trump. Despite the fact that he ripped up the JCPOA, Iran went behind the negotiating table, again, looking to make concessions. But again, those talks were not fruitful, and many in Tehran view that this is Israel's war, that this was not a war that benefits the Americans, the American people. It is clear that no country in this region wanted this war. It is of many people's view that this was Israel's war, and it has happened. It has happened, and we'll see where things go from here.
Reza, thank you very much. We'll be speaking with you later on in the program. So I want to bring back in our guest now. So Yossi, one of the objectives here at this point, I mean, since we heard from Donald Trump, is regime change. He's urged, the Iranians to rise up when military operations are over. But isn't this a rather fraught proposal? I mean, in Libya and Afghanistan and Iraq, regime change hasn't turned out so well. What makes you think this time it'll be better?
First of all, you're right. We don't know what's going to happen in the day after, if there is a day after. We don't know that. But we have already experienced 47 years of this regime, and we know how bad he is, not only for the region and for the international community, but also for the Iranians themselves. They had to go to the streets and demonstrate against this regime, calling for the death of the dictator, as they said. And what they were facing was readiness by the regime to shoot them in the head. And nobody knows the exact number, but more than 30,000 probably were murdered by the regime. So any replacement of this regime is going to be better than this one. And there is a reason to hope that after 47 years under this regime, we shall have a totally different Iran, Iran that is really worried about the well-being of its people, Iran that wants to be a good neighbor to all all the other countries of the Middle East, Iran that can cooperate with economically and technologically. They are very capable. They can cooperate with the rest of the Middle East on all these matters, including with Israel. And we are looking forward to see a totally different Iran. And that's for the better of everybody, first and foremost for the Iranians themselves.
Yossi, I'm joined in the studio again, international affairs commentator Andrew Hillier and our Ashad Alajani from our Observer's Desk. Andrew, I think you have a question.
Yes, that's right. I'd just like to ask our guest, Yossi Kupovas, a question. Just picking up on what you said there in your answer with regards to the Iranian regime and the 47 years during which it has been in power. You mentioned that you said there that whatever comes after will be better than the current regime. But how can you be so sure of that?
I'm not sure. I said that I don't know, but I don't know what's going to come after. But one thing is clear: what we know, what we have now, and this is something totally unbearable. So, sorry. We know what we have now, and this is unbearable. We see this regime determined to get a nuclear weapon. We see this regime killing his own people. We see this regime supporting terror. This is the first amongst the countries of the world in supporting terror. This is definitely something unacceptable. So we shall have to make an effort to make sure that we support the more moderate elements in the Iranian people that would hopefully be able to assume the responsibility for Iran in the future. There is definitely a problem within the Iranian opposition because they can't fix their house. But we shall see this. They might go through some democratic process and decide which leadership they want to have.
And Yossi, so what can we expect in the coming days?
In the coming days, we shall see more of what we've seen ever since this morning. Attacks on the Iranian ballistic missiles and the military industry, nuclear facilities, that on the one hand, and the attacks against the Iranian regime and the leadership, and the attack against the security apparatuses that support the regime that keeps it in power. And as President Trump said, once these people will decide that they don't want to continue with that and they are going to lay down their arms, then this is going to take some time, I guess. Then we shall be able to move to the next phase, which is allowing the Iranian people to decide their fate.
Now, Yossi, I would assume the majority of the people in Israel support this action. They've been hoping for regime change. But here in France, the president has called for an emergency meeting of the Security Council, and international reaction has been pressing for a diplomatic solution. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, the issue today is the survival of the regime. There's not going to be any diplomatic solution that will call for the fall of the regime. That's the regime is not going to agree to such a thing. So the diplomatic channel, in my mind, is not very promising at this point. We shall just have to finish the job. That's what, in order to make Iran to bring Iran to a different position, a different place. This is not going to be achieved through diplomatic effort. The diplomatic efforts channel was open for the Iranians until this morning. They didn't use it properly. They played games. They refused to accept that they are going to give up the enrichment of uranium. And even though the Americans didn't insist that much on the other elements that were on the table, the ballistic missiles, the Iranian support to the terrorist organizations that supported groups throughout the Middle East, all these issues were not demanded from the Iranians. There was only one demand: give up the nuclear program. Give up having the idea that you're going to have a nuclear weapon. Say no nuclear weapons in Iran. That was quote President Trump. And they refused to do so. So there's no point in them now saying, oh, we made a mistake. This is not going to work anymore.
Okay, Yossi, stay with us for a moment. I want to bring Andrew back in.
Yes, Yossi, I'd just like to pick up on a point you made there regarding Iran's negotiating position. We did hear just before these strikes took place this morning that Oman, of course, the mediator of those indirect talks, did say that there had been a breakthrough in those talks, saying that Iran had agreed not to stockpile enriched uranium. Would that in itself cannot be considered progress in the negotiations?
No. What the Iranians wanted was to go back to an improved JCPOA. That would be some agreement with some limitations on their nuclear project, but without giving up enrichment and that it would be limited in time. There's going to be an agreement for 7 years or something like that, and then they will be allowed to enrich uranium again and stockpile uranium. And they wouldn't give up they wouldn't send to the United States the highly enriched uranium that they've already accumulated, the 450 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium that may be turned and enriched into military level within no time at all. So on all the major topics, they were not showing any flexibility. And the Americans are very clear on that. You have to give up the nuclear project, not temporarily, for good. And they were not ready to do so. So it's all these descriptions of the Omani mediator. I understand him. He wants to be successful. That's understood. But this was not a real description of what happened in those talks. The Iranians stalled, showed very limited flexibility, insisted on having the capability to enrich uranium, insisted on having these limitations on their nuclear project limited in time. And these are not positions that can satisfy the United States.
And Yossi, with the ongoing attacks right now, there's been also a lot of reaction regionally. What are the implications there? Are we concerned that this could become a broader conflict in the region?
Look, the United States leads this effort. They are deployed in Bahrain, in Qatar, in other countries in the Middle East, Jordan, in some deployment in Israel. They have gathered here an enormous amount of weapons that are supposed to take care of this problem and make sure that the damage done to other countries in the Middle East is limited. It's a war, you know. There are going to be casualties. There are going to be damage. There's going to be damage done to other countries besides Israel and the United States. We definitely know that, and there's no surprise here. But the goal is to get rid of this regime that launches missiles all over the place and using statistical weapons that can hurt many people. And we have prepared a very strong defense, not only on Israel and the American facilities, but also on other countries that might be hurt. And I hope that the damage done is going to be limited as much as we can. We cannot reach zero, but as much as we can, we'll do our best.
Yossi, thank you so much for joining us today, speaking with us on the program. That's Yossi Wasserman there from the Israeli Crisis Center. For more, we can now bring in our correspondent in Jerusalem, Noga Tornopolsky. Noga, I hope you're also staying safe. I understand there were air raid sirens going off earlier. I hope all is well where you are currently.
Hello, Catherine. I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Oh, I was just saying that we know there were air raid sirens earlier, and I was hoping that you were all right now. And also wondering if you can tell me currently what's happening and what the mood is like.
I'm all right, thank you. I am next to the bomb shelter, as everyone has been instructed to remain. Israelis were told they could leave the bomb shelters about half an hour ago or so. There's been, I would say, a small but constant response, retaliation from Iran against Israel. So far, we have not seen the massive barrages of missiles that we saw back in June in the 12-day war. We haven't seen 80 missiles launched at once. We've even, on some occasions, seen one missile or 3 missiles. Obviously, these can cost lives and can cause immense damage, but it hasn't yet become the massive attack to which Israelis were told to expect in the case of an Iranian retaliation to a U.S. attack, which is what was expected by most Israelis. The mood here, I would say, is tense and a little bit confused because it was not expected that Israel would be the first to strike. And because the prime minister, in his brief declaration earlier today, basically echoed what Donald Trump had said. And he described this operation, which is likely to cause Israeli lives and to which 100,000 reserve forces have already been called up. He described this as an operation to liberate Iran. Yes, also to protect Israel from what he called an existential threat, but this is a threat he said had been obliterated back in June. So there is a little bit of confusion, and we're going to have to see how things develop over the next few days.
Now, Noga, this Epic Fury operation, it's between the U.S. and Israel, the cooperation there. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, for one, Israel is calling it Roaring Lion. I don't know why. And what we know is that it was a joint attack. This is a really unusual set of circumstances because Israel and the United States are not allied forces under an allied command, such as we saw, for example, at the end of World War II, when forces had joined together under a single hierarchy. It is unclear, for example, to me, despite trying to find out during the day, if the United States and Israel are actually flying sorties together over Iran, or if these are separate operations in targeting different sites in Iran, one Israeli, one American. We know that there's been very, very close consultation between the two countries, and that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is still expected, as far as I know, to arrive here on Monday, breaking the closure of the Israeli airspace, incidentally, that was declared today. But it is an extremely unusual collaboration, and it was just as unusual to hear the Israeli Prime Minister addressing his own people who are exhausted after 2.5 years of war, a war that has not officially ended yet on the Israeli side, basically receiving a Hebrew language translation of the United States message, which is "we're coming in to free you," directed at Iranians.
Now, Noga, are there concerns at this point that Iran-linked militias like Hezbollah or the Houthis in Yemen will take this opportunity to launch fresh attacks?
Absolutely, absolutely, Catherine. So the Houthis already joined one of the attacks today. With Hezbollah, the question is open. Hezbollah did make a sort of half official announcement about 2 days ago saying that if the attack on Iran was to be limited, that it did not expect to join the theater of war. We don't know where things stand now. And Hezbollah is under tremendous pressure from the United States, from France, to disarm completely, to cease its existence as a terror group. And Hezbollah also is still carrying scars from the fact that when Israel attacked Hezbollah, now 1.5 years ago or so, and bombed to death its entire leadership in what became known as the Beeper attacks, Iran did not rally to defend Hezbollah. So it's unclear exactly where things stand between Iran and its top regional proxy. But I can tell you that among the 100 or slightly more than 100,000 Israelis called up to the reserves, some are being sent to the Lebanese border, some to the Syrian border. So there is absolutely an active concern about those arenas.
And Noga, I mean, there's been also on the international scene a push for diplomacy here. I understand maybe not everyone in Israel is terribly happy. There might be some protest.
Well, Netanyahu is not a popular leader in Israel, and there have been regular protests against him for most of the length of the whole war. There were protests against him for mismanaging the war and for failing to get the Israeli hostages back. This followed a year of unprecedented protests in Israel ahead of the war that opposed Netanyahu's efforts to perpetrate basically a civilian coup d'etat, to subsume Israel's judiciary under an authoritarian executive, an effort that continues even today. And the protests since the ceasefire has been put into place and the hostages were released have been protests really focused on forcing Netanyahu to call elections, on calling for an end to his almost 20-year hold on power. Now, I think the protests won't take place this evening, but that shouldn't indicate a change of political heart. That it would simply be obeying military orders that have canceled all massive events and have ordered people to remain shelter in place, I would say, to remain close by to bomb shelters until further notice.
Noga, thank you so much for keeping us updated. We'll be talking to you a little later on. And just a reminder here on our special coverage, the U.S. and Israel have launched an attack on Iran targeting regime sites across the country. Liza Kamenov has more on what's been happening so far.
Smoke hangs over Tehran's skyline as Iranian media reported explosions across the capital Saturday following a joint US-Israeli strike. The first blasts were heard near the offices of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Security forces were swiftly deployed, blocking all roads surrounding the leader's residence. In a video posted on Truth Social, President Donald Trump confirmed the operation, framing it as a defensive action to protect the United States and its allies.
We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. We are going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world, and we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon.
The strikes follow the US's biggest military deployment to the Middle East in years, a pressure campaign on Iran to stop its nuclear development program. They also follow talks held just 2 days ago between US and Iranian diplomats on Iran's nuclear and ballistic ambitions. In Israel, sirens rang out in cities including Haifa and Jerusalem as authorities declared a state of emergency and warned residents of retaliation, asking them to seek shelter. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed the joint offensive in a video message, calling it an effort to remove what he described as an existential threat posed by Iran.
Together with the US, we will strike hard at the terror regime and create the conditions that will allow the brave Iranian people to rid themselves of this murderous regime. Citizens of this wonderful nation, this is your opportunity to establish a new and free Iran. Take your destiny into your own hands.
Iranian media reported that the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that a first retaliatory wave of missiles and drones has been launched against Israel in response. Sirens have sounded in Jordan and Bahrain, where US military bases and fleets are located, and the US embassies in Qatar, the UAE and Israel have warned staffers and Americans to shelter. Flights have been suspended to Israel, Iran and neighboring countries.
We're going to bring back our international affairs editor, Andrew Hillier. So, Andrew, all this that we've been discussing, we've been talking a little bit about the regional repercussions, but can you outline that further for us?
Yeah, well, the regional repercussions of what is unfolding in Iran today are huge. Just one piece of information, I'll bring you one line that we heard in the last few hours was the fact that the Iranian Foreign Ministry released this statement saying that Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, had called the attacks, the Israeli-US attacks on Iran, unprovoked, illegal and illegitimate. He's also made phone calls to Gulf states and warned against the use of their facilities and territories by the US and Israel. Of course, as we know, all morning, all day now, there have been reports, sounds of explosions up and down the Gulf, on Gulf states. including the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, several waves of attacks all morning, hearing those reports of those waves of attack. Now, the UAE and Bahrain say they have dealt with those Iranian missiles. Bahrain, of course, is home to the US Navy's 5th Fleet. Bahraini authorities earlier confirmed that a center at the US 5th Fleet HQ was hit. I think another important point to make here is that compared to previous confrontations that we've seen between Iran and Israel, particularly last year, the retaliation from Iran was immediate. In the past, what Iran has tended to do is reach out to officials ahead of those attacks to give them some advance warning, to calibrate their response, to avoid too sharp of an escalation. That does not appear to have happened in this instant. Now, some Gulf states have been saying that they reserve the right to respond. Of course, they'll be thinking very carefully about whether or not they do respond to these attacks. And of course, it has to be said that regional players will be watching very nervously what is happening, what is unfolding in Iran right now. We know that many of those countries have been involved in mediation efforts over the past weeks, over the past months. They've been trying, amongst them, for example, Oman, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been urging the Trump administration not to carry out this attack. Indeed, there are reports that it was indeed some of the Gulf states that may have actually convinced Trump into calling off a retaliatory attack earlier in the year, in the immediate aftermath of the uprising by large segments of the Iranian population against the regime. So you can be rest assured that those countries, those regional countries, those Gulf states are going to be frantically trying to position themselves as mediators in the upcoming days and possibly weeks, depending on how long this goes on for, to try and work to convince the Israelis and the US to climb down their attacks, and they're going to be working to try and create a diplomatic off-ramp to all of the actors involved in this conflict.
Now, Andrew, we know that the French president has called for the UN Security Council to have an urgent meeting regarding what's been happening. What are other world leaders saying, and how have they been reacting?
Yeah, I think it is important just to briefly walk through what the reaction from world leaders has been to these attacks. I'll just go through them briefly now. We've, of course, as you just mentioned, heard from French President Emmanuel Macron warning that the US-Israeli strikes could spark a regional catastrophe. He said very blunt warnings coming from the French presidency, called for the escalation to stop. France calling for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. You can see on your screen there that statement from the French President Emmanuel Macron. There you can see the outbreak of war carries grave consequences for international peace and security. He also added in that statement further down, the Iranian people must also be able to freely build their future. He said the massacres committed by the Islamic regime disqualify it and demand that the voice that the voice be returned to the people. The sooner the better, he said. So important statement from Emmanuel Macron. Qatar and Saudi Arabia, I mentioned those regional countries earlier, also calling for an immediate halt to the escalation. Oman urging all parties to immediately cease military operations. I'll quickly bring you as well reaction from Australia and Canada, both the Australian Prime Minister and Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, saying that their countries back the US attempts, it says, to stop Iran from getting a nuclear bomb.
And Irshad, yes?
Yeah, I wanted to bring another point of view, maybe about the reaction of Tehran to these attacks. That it appears that they are playing what looks like a last card at the very closest, at the very outset of the war, striking across Arab countries in the Persian Gulf could be a doomsday plan, the last card, because that's a move that would almost inevitably risk forming a broader coalition against the regime that would be normally a final high-stake escalation. But the fact is that it raised this question that do they want that they think that they are at the last stand, or they are trying to raise the cost of any further attack against them. But to give a state of the mind of the regime, maybe I can bring something else, that Hossein Yekta, he is one of the closest commanders, IRGC commanders to Ali Khamenei, and his son Mujtaba Khamenei, who is the same figure who some weeks ago announced the crackdown bloodshed on state TV on 8th January. And he said on state TV today that Khamenei has vowed the fight this time will be Ashura-like. And I'll explain it. What's Ashura-like is a Shia tradition. It's a Shia symbol. Ashura symbolizes a battle that ends in the martyrdom, stand taken regardless of the cost. That language suggests a readiness of confrontation, framing existential, even sacrificial facial terms. And it gives the impression that Khamenei is steering the regime towards a moment he casts as historic and decisive, whatever the consequences is. So we can now maybe explain why they are reacting like this, attacking all the Arab countries in the Persian Gulf instead of, for example, U.S. Armada, U.S. Carriers, U.S. ships on the Persian Gulf and beyond.
I'd just like to pick up on something that Ashad was saying there. Ashad was referencing the protest, the uprising that took place earlier this year. When I was reporting in Iran a year and a half ago, speaking to students, to people on the streets, you did already get this sense of course, a fatigue with the system, of this real desire for change. And one of the figures, of course, who we have been hearing from a lot, we heard a lot from him during those protests in Iran. One of the most significant opposition figures based outside Iran is Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the deposed Shah of Iran. And earlier today, he announced that he supported Donald Trump's military operation, while at the same time telling Iranians to stay indoors, to stay safe while this bombing campaign was underway. And I do believe we can listen to what he said earlier.
همیهنان عزیزم لحظاتی سرنوشت ساز پیش روی ماست.
My dear compatriots in Iran, in these sensitive hours and days, more than any other time, we must remain focused on our final goal, taking back Iran. I want you to stay in your homes for now and maintain your peace and security. Be alert and ready, so that at the appropriate time, which I will inform you of precisely, you return to the streets for the final action.
Yeah, we watched Reza Pahlavi, that what he said, that in a 3 minutes video message that he broadcasted, he published today on social media, he asked the IRGC, police and army to join people and stop killing people, and he described the Tehran's regime as a sinking ship that they need to leave it as soon as possible. And at the end, as we heard, he says that the people stay at home until further notice, that appropriate, be alert and ready, so that the appropriate time, which I will inform you of precisely, you return to the streets for the final action. Lots of experts that we had on the set, who say that the wars or regime change cannot be imposed by bombing. But there is a point here that Reza Pahlavi mentions too is that we should not forget the massacre that Iranian people endured some weeks ago. So there is a huge anger among the Iranian toward regime. Even the former representatives of regime, and that could be a very decisive moment that somehow, if these attacks could dismantle the repression force of the regime, then that could be a very turning point, that if people come to the streets, which is possible after the massacre, that it changes everything.
And that is a fascinating point, because Israel, the US, military planners, advisors, Donald Trump's advisors, they will have taken all of this into account, I think, when they've been engaging in the military planning, the weeks, months of planning that's gone into this. For them, they will have seen this as a window of opportunity. From their perspective, this is perhaps one of the best windows of opportunities they have ever had in recent times, or perhaps ever will have. They have calculated that the regime is at a unique moment of vulnerability. It's the most fragile it's been in 47 years. So that will obviously have been taken into account when they decided to launch this military operation. And we can see that with regards to the targets that have been included here. These are not just military targets. It isn't like last June. I think it's important just to emphasize the point. We have said it several times, but we must emphasize the point. It's not like last June, where you just had military, where you had mainly military targets, nuclear facilities, those B-2 American warplanes targeting those nuclear facilities deep in the Iranian mountains. You have regime targets. We've seen the pictures of the presidential compound being attacked, of Ali Khamenei's own compound being attacked in the center of Tehran. And even listening to Donald Trump's speech as well, there was a huge indication listening to that speech of what he wants to see here. He differentiated it largely from last year's Operation Midnight Hammer. And Trump essentially pointed out in his speech, he kind of prepared the US public for the possibility of losing US lives. Now, if you just think about that for a second, that is, that is a huge moment for this president, because he campaigned for the presidency promising not to be engaged in foreign wars. So now, listening to his speech, he's saying, there may be U.S. lives lost here. That just shows you how big a turning point and a moment this is. And of course, as we've been saying, Donald Trump openly encouraging Iranians to rise up against the regime. It could be a very risky strategy, but there's no way of telling right now what's going to happen on the ground.
Yeah, as you pointed out, it is a risky proposition. Maybe they do feel at this point, the advisors to the U.S. president, that this is as fragile, as you said, as the regime will be, and this is the opportunity. But I can't help think back to the Iraq War and the U.S. invasion there. They also talked to Iraqi expats, and what they were told and that they could expect when they arrived it turned out to be something completely different. So there is a concern that this is a miscalculation, or that the will of the Iranian people still isn't enough. So where does that leave us then?
But there is no the blueprint for a draft how to manage a war, especially when you want to topple a regime who has ideology, petrol, dollars, and weapon. So I think the outcome is as unknown as it gets. But another point of view, I can say that the Trump himself created this expectation among the Iranians when he said that attack the regime buildings, and Iranians, lots of Iranians that I talked to, they were expecting the help that he says that is on the way who arrived. For example, we talked to someone who lost a friend in his arms in Tehran 8th January, and he said we went to the streets by millions peacefully. They killed us by tens of thousands. What we can do more, and what nation on earth that look at the sky and wait for the bombs to arrive. So it's not people are not stupid. They know that the war is war. It's dangerous. They are the people, innocent people, civilians would die. But what they it's a dark pragmatism, I think, that they think that we cannot topple this regime. So maybe the byproduct of the of U.S. and Israeli attack on Iran, for whatever reason that they have, maybe byproduct of it could be our freedom. And it's not what they want, a war. They don't want being bombed. But I think it's clearly out of desperation.
Irshad, thank you very much. Andrew, thank you as well. Stay with us here on France 24. We're going to be back after a quick break.
In 1990, Yemen became a unified state. But for the past 10 years, the country has been torn apart by war. And in Aden, secessionist demands are growing. The STC, or Southern Transitional Council, now claims sovereignty over the territory.
The people of the South must reclaim their state.
With famine and a healthcare system on the brink.
Even some of the simple investigation not available in this hospital.
Checkpoints on both sides stand face to face. Watch Aden Revisited on France 24.
Your stories inspire the future. Your daily lives create the news. Your cultures, struggles, and successes are at the heart of our programs. We tell the stories of those who made our planet and those who are building it. We tell the story of the world, shaped by the lives of those who live there.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. In October 2007, the Zoe's Ark scandal hit the headlines.
Did the people who entrusted the children to you know that they were going to France? No.
A humanitarian couple claimed to be offering a second chance to orphans from Darfur, children who, for the most part, actually lived with their families in Chad.
They say you sold your children, but who sells their child? It's because they promised us an education, that's why we agreed.
It was child theft, a real kidnapping. It's a disgrace. We heard many stories that we were taken to be used, maybe made to work in a factory. We were young, we didn't understand anything.
18 years later, we met up with the victims.
They told us each child would receive 60,000 euros in compensation, and for now, they've received nothing. If someone recognizes their mistakes and apologizes, then you know that person has changed. But if they refuse to admit their faults and keep defending their cause, then you cannot forgive them.
Watch Zoe's Ark scandal revisited on France 24 and France24.com.
The U.S. and Israel coordinate attacks against Iran, launching a wave of missiles starting at 8:10 a.m. local time. Both the Iranian president and the supreme leader targeted in the first wave. U.S. President Donald Trump urges Iranians to rise up and seize control when military action is over. We'll get reaction from the U.S. with the Guardian's bureau chief, David Smith. Iran has retaliated, launching ballistic missiles and drones at Israel as well as U.S. military bases in the region. Explosions have been heard in Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi. At least one person has been killed from falling debris in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome to this special edition of Around the World with me, Catherine Viette. I'm also joined in the studio by Andrew Hilliar from our International Affairs Desk, and we'll be heading to Washington, D.C. to speak with David Smith, the Guardian's U.S. Bureau Chief. The U.S. and Israel have launched a coordinated daylight attack on Iran called Epic Fury. It began at 8:10 a.m. local time as Iranians were at work and at school. Airstrikes have hit targets across the country, including near the president's office and the offices of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in Tehran. U.S. President Donald Trump said this is the beginning of major combat operations against Iran and warned that American lives may be lost as a result. Iran's state media is reporting that one of the missiles launched by the U.S.-Israeli attack hit a school in the southern part of the country. An Iranian official said the strike has killed 51 students at a girls' elementary school, and another 60 students have been wounded. The regional governor for Manab County said the death toll could rise. Now let's cross over to Washington, D.C. and bring in David Smith, the Guardian's Washington bureau chief. So, David, I understand that Donald Trump also bypassed Congress this time around. Some congressmen a bit upset about that, about the White House not informing them. So what more can you tell us about the reaction back there in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, sharply divided reaction as ever in Washington to this absolutely astonishing move. I think despite the military buildup that we had seen in recent weeks and the massive scale of it, there's still an element of surprise when the attack actually happened, and particularly for members of the opposition Democratic Party, they're incensed by this, that once again the president has acted unilaterally, effectively going to war, and he used that word in his remarks, which should be the purview of Congress, but they were completely sidelined by this. And Democrats take the view that there's no legal basis for this war, that they should have been consulted. There had been some legislation on the War Powers Act, but that was just brushed aside. By contrast, Republicans, at least some of them, are certainly backing Donald Trump as always, saying we should pray for our troops. There is that older, hawkish element of the Republican Party who have been plotting a war in Iran for decades. And I think there's a sense they can't believe their luck that this day has arrived, and in such an unlikely form, because Donald Trump, of course, had spent years campaigning against the concept of regime change. He said he was opposed to the war in Iraq 20 years ago. He promised to keep the US out of these kind of foreign entanglements, and yet here he is actively talking about regime change in Iran. So while some Republicans are delighted about that, I think as the hours wear on today, we could see quite a backlash from Trump's populist base, who will say they're betrayed. They elected him for something other than this, and in past operations so far, he's been able to ride that out because it's just been airstrikes, usually without American loss of life, but notably in his little speech, he did raise the prospects of American casualties, and I think that will cross a line, and that will be difficult for many Americans to stomach.
Now, we know that at some point today, Trump is supposed to be speaking at his Florida home, Mar-a-Lago. Do we have any idea of what we can expect to hear from him?
It would be speculation on my part. I think some of it will probably be answering those critics, those who say, there is no legal basis for this. I would expect him to really set out the case again, just why he felt this was necessary and why now. So I'm sure he will talk again about the threat that he says Iran poses to the United States and describe its role as a malign influence in the region and its threat to Israel. Of course, central to that, I'm sure he will highlight again the necessity of preventing Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon. But he does have catching up to do because Trump did not talk much about any of that over the past few weeks. And of course, as ever in the United States, there were many distractions, including the Jeffrey Epstein files, but even the State of the Union address earlier this week, he did not discuss Iran until more than an hour into the speech. And so there is that sense that Washington almost sleptwalked into this. There has not been much build-up and far less engagement, say, than the Iraq War. George W. Bush obviously had a very, very flawed case about weapons of mass destruction, but there was much debate on that. He did try to engage the UN and international partners. This time, Trump has gone it alone with a massive political and military gamble, and critics are saying, of course, a very reckless gamble that could result in chaos in Iran, and even the best case scenario will be hugely expensive to the American taxpayer.
David, after I asked you that, we just saw a news alert come in from the White House that now is saying that Trump has no plans to address the nation. So I guess we'll just have to wait a little bit longer to see what any official reaction does come from the Trump administration. Now, before we move on, I do want to ask about the talks that wrapped up on Thursday. The Iranian side had said that the U.S. was sort of giving conflicting information. They didn't seem to be all on the same page. So did the U.S. actually give the talks a chance, or was a military strike always the end game here?
Yeah, I think that's one of the questions we're already seeing debated because there was at least the illusion of trying diplomacy. And let's remember, Donald Trump just set up an organization called the Board of Peace, and somewhat bizarrely, last year was awarded the FIFA Peace Prize by World Football's governing body. And he did dispatch his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and also Steve Witkoff to these negotiations. I think in theory, at least, a lot was hinging on that. And they came away somewhat disappointed. They obviously had the primary goal of just basically stopping Iran's enrichment of uranium. Iran was not willing to go that far. I think other US objectives potentially included Iran's more conventional missiles and stopping its funding of terror proxies. But I think you will see now that question debated, was all of that an illusion? Were those talks really headed anywhere, or was it a distraction, a cover story, because the scale of the US military buildup was so massive? We've never seen a military scale up so advanced to be not used. And it became almost perhaps inevitable, some would argue, that some kind of strike was going to take place. And I suspect you may hear Iranian voices say they feel betrayed that those negotiations were actually never in good faith, and that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu had planned this weeks or even months ago, and today was always going to be the day.
David, stay with us for a moment. I want to bring in our international affairs editor, Andrew Hillier, now. So, Andrew, you've heard what he's been saying. I think you had a question you wanted to follow up on.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to bounce back in a way off one of the things that David pointed out about how different this feels in the build-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq compared to now, when you take into account the fact that the George W. Bush administration did go to strenuous lengths to try and convince the American public and the world at large of the righteousness and even the legality of its operation. And that is, of course, as David pointed out, something that we haven't really seen this time round from the Trump administration. And what is interesting is when you consider the fact that this also reflects perhaps this continuation of the breakdown of the rules-based international order. And the fact also that Donald Trump appears to have been emboldened by what he sees as the successful military operations that he believes he's carried out. For example, last June with his strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Either way, that's an operation that he sold as a success. And of course, the operation in Venezuela to snatch Nicolas Maduro. And what appears to have happened each time is that, in spite of warnings from experts and analysts warning about worst case scenarios, Donald Trump believes each time that he has escaped those worst case scenarios. And I'm just wondering, David, is there a sense in Washington that Donald Trump, the fact that he has gone ahead with this operation, that it is in part because of the fact that he feels emboldened by those past operations, such as last June, what we saw in Iran and Venezuela earlier this year?
I think that's right, and this ultimately goes back to Donald Trump's character, even long before he got into politics. As a businessman, just being direct and rolling the dice and hoping things will pan out, and they didn't always. He did go bankrupt sometimes. But so far in politics, I mean, one example he loves to cite himself as evidence that he is right and the experts are wrong is during his first term, moving the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. And he says the experts warned, the sky would crash down, and in fact, everything was fine. And there's multiple other examples like that, in his view, both domestically and internationally. Another was the killing of Iranian General Soleimani, which again, people said this could ignite some conflagration, and in fact, the response was relatively minor. And you have seen his personality come out, this bold unilateral approach where it's better to act first and not even apologize later, but not wait for the wheels of bureaucracy to turn, not wait for the critics to have their say. And that comes right down to seemingly trivial examples of seizing control of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, or suddenly one day demolishing the East Wing of the White House. That latter example, normally there could be committees formed and consultations and discussions, and Trump takes this approach, I'm just going to get it done, and cut through the bureaucracy, cut through the consultation. And yes, so far in foreign policy and certainly in military matters, he does feel he's been getting away with this. And I do think today might only be happening because Venezuela was such a perceived success, with no U.S. military loss of life, and the leader of Venezuela captured. And you heard Trump almost boasting about its success and how awesome the military is. And I think even then there was that fear that could make him arrogant and just make him too self-assured and believe that anything and everything is possible. And we will see what happens in Iran, but I wonder if he has considered the full scale, the full implications of this, which are of a different order, really, from what happened in Venezuela.
David, thank you so much for keeping us updated. That's David Smith, the Guardian Washington bureau chief. And now to some news that is just coming in. The Israeli military says it completed a broad strike on the strategic defense system of the Iranian regime. The Iranian foreign minister says we are attacking military bases in the region as an act of self-defense. Let's cross now to London and bring in Jasmine El-Gamal, a political analyst and former Pentagon Middle East advisor. Thank you so much for joining us today in the program. So we've just been speaking to our correspondent in Washington, talking a bit about Donald Trump and his actions. He's been acting unilaterally since he returned to office in the U.S. And we saw, him go into Venezuela and detain and arrest Nicolas Maduro. Now, in the midst of negotiations, he's bombed Iran. He seems to be upending diplomacy here and getting away with it. So what do you think the impact of his actions have been?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your program. I think, Donald Trump has never shied away from unilateral action, whether it's domestically or internationally. So this certainly it's not a surprise that he's acting unilaterally. I don't think anyone expected Donald Trump to go to the UN and seek approval or have discussions or consultations with allies, from the region about this strike, or even go to Congress to ask for permission. So this was a unilateral strike, and we have no idea what will unfold from here on out over the next few days. There's huge potential for escalation, as you were just discussing earlier. As of now, Iran has hit U.S. facilities in 5 out of the 6 GCC countries. The GCC countries are now coordinating together and talking with each other about how they want to move forward vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis the U.S., whether they want to relax some of the restrictions that surround U.S. Use of their territories to strike at Iran. Obviously, the U.S. has a huge military presence right now in the region, the largest since the Iraq War. So all of the factors for a broader conflict are there in the region. And one really wonders what would be the thing that would stop this from escalating if all of the warnings from the regional countries, from the Omanis as the main mediators, were not enough to get Donald Trump to refrain from striking until negotiations were completely exhausted. I don't know what would.
Now, I was also discussing the negotiations that had finished Thursday, and then, the strikes coming right after that. And the Israeli government had said these were in the works for months. So were the negotiations meant to fail? Were they in good faith or not, do you believe?
Well, that's a really good question. This is the second time now, of course, last year with the 12-day war and the run-up to the 12-day war, the U.S. and Iran were also in negotiations, and the Iranians were presenting proposals to the U.S. team, and then they were struck. So you're absolutely right to ask that question. I think the answer, I don't know if we will have the answer to that question anytime soon. Certainly in terms of intentions, I don't know what's in Donald Trump's head, and I don't know how much he had been swayed by the Israelis, by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has always wanted regime change for decades in Iran, ever since I was working at the Pentagon back in 2008. And so I don't know that President Trump really came into office this term thinking that he was going to make sure that regime change in Iran happened, or whether he was slowly convinced, both by hawks within the U.S. administration, the executive branch and the legislative branch, or whether he always thought he would do this. We know that when his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, first entered into negotiations this time around, and last time as well, that the Americans were initially willing to talk about lower levels of enrichment with the Iranians that didn't go up to the level required for making a nuclear weapon. And then, based on pressure and discussions with the Israelis, the American position went to the maximalist 0% enrichment. And that made negotiations a lot more difficult.
Now, Jasmine, you mentioned their regime change. That's something that we've been talking a lot today on the program. Last month were the anti-government protests, some of the largest Iran has seen. They were brutally repressed, but that's got to be a calculation here that the Iranian people do want a different form of government. Do you think this is the closest they can come to achieve that, or is this going to turn into another Iraq where what we think is going to happen turns out to be something completely different?
Right. Well, I certainly can't speak for the Iranian people, and we have seen them out protesting in the tens and tens of thousands, and protesting over years. Again, when I was at the Pentagon 2009, the Green Revolution, you've had Women, Life, Freedom, and then you've had the protests this year. So it is absolutely safe to say that the Iranian people have made it very clear that they want a different kind of leadership, one that is not so oppressive, and one that does not spend most of its resources supporting proxies and getting into indirect conflicts across the region. That said, we're talking here about regime change. We're talking about violations of international law. We're talking about impunity for certain actors in the world, for certain countries to go out and physically change the governments of other countries without any kind of oversight or accountability, including to their own taxpayers, in the case of the US, for example. And so, as you mentioned, with Iraq, I mean, go ask the Iraqi people how they felt about that regime change operation and how much they had to suffer in the years after that. So there is a huge list of options when we talk about changing regime behavior that does not go all the way to changing the actual regime itself, with all of the risks that come with that. And just very quickly, lastly, I'll say that the Omani foreign minister was on U.S. media yesterday on Face the Nation saying that he believed, and this is very rare for the Omanis to do this and to do a public media appearance like this, he said he believed that the Iranians had made significant concessions, that they were prepared to commit to not having a nuclear weapon, that they had agreed to go to zero stockpiling, which is necessary to achieve a nuclear weapon. And that interview aired less than 24 hours before the U.S. and Israeli strikes.
Now, some news just coming in, Jasmine. The Iranian foreign minister has said in a message to Trump about regime change in Iran that this is mission impossible. However, he also said that Iran was willing to talk. So do we see an off-ramp here, possibly?
Well, again, like I said, the Iranians were already talking. The Iranians and the U.S. were already talking. They just weren't talking to the satisfaction, I suppose, of the Israelis and of the Trump administration, in the sense of agreeing to zero enrichment. There were also some talks about how reluctant the Iranians were to talk about their ballistic missile program and support for proxies. And so there was frustration on the U.S. side, and certainly with pressure from Prime Minister Netanyahu about slow progress on the negotiating track. That said, the Iranians know that they are no match militarily in the long term for a combined U.S.-Israeli continued offensive. And so it does not surprise me that they want to come back to the table. The question is, will they now come back to the table with even more concessions that than they've made before, such as agreeing to zero enrichment and opening up the talks to cover ballistic missiles? Or is that just going to be another way of basically negotiating themselves out of existence as opposed to being bombed out of existence? It's a tough spot for the Iranian regime to be in right now.
Yasmin, stay with us. I want to bring back our international affairs editor, Andrew Hillier. So, Andrew, you heard what she was saying there about the possibility of negotiations.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to actually pick up on a point that Yasmin made there and actually ask Yasmin directly a question, if I may, and it's with regards to the negotiations that you mentioned there. You raised the, I suppose, the possibility of perhaps Iran being open to or not discussing its ballistic missile program. Of course, we know that is one of the stated aims of the US negotiating team, is to get Iran talking about its ballistic missile program. But given that that is essentially, an essential pillar of its security architecture, part of its deterrent, I mean, when would that even be conceivable for the Iranian regime?
That's an excellent point. That's exactly what I was referring to when I said that if the Iranians were forced to open up the discussions to address their ballistic missile program, that they would essentially be negotiating themselves out of existence in their minds, because the ballistic missile program is a huge pillar of its defense and its projection of power in the region and projection of deterrence capability in the region, especially after its nuclear program was severely degraded after the 12-day war last year, and its proxies have been severely degraded as well over the last couple of years, specifically their most powerful proxy, which was Hezbollah in Lebanon. So that ballistic missile program is really, really important to them, so important that they prioritized reconstituting it after the 12-day war, to the point where intelligence estimates now put the stockpile at around the same as it was before the 12-day war, at least in terms of the missiles themselves. So absolutely great point. This is going to be a very important decision that the Iranians have to make moving forward, whether to offer that open book to the Americans and say, look, we're ready to talk about this, and maybe talk about letting go of this program. But like you said, what would they do without it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that raises the question of has the Iranian regime, the clerical regime in this instance, decided that they have more chance of survival by taking the risk of being engaged in a conflict, perhaps obviously something they would hope to be a short-term conflict with the US and Israel? They appear to have calculated here that they have more chance of surviving that than they would have of surviving had they negotiated themselves out of existence, as you say, by including ballistic missiles on the agenda in those negotiations. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
It's a tough one. It's hard to know what the Iranians are thinking right now. The US has never quite came out and said that it was pursuing regime change or encouraging regime change. So this is something new. Donald Trump, when he said this morning, talking to the Iranian people and telling them to rise up, and that the US was behind them, and that this was a once in many, many generations opportunity. He was also talking to members of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and telling them to lay down their weapons and get immunity. Otherwise, they would seek a certain death. The president also talked to the American people and talked about the possibility of, or even the likelihood of U.S. casualties, seemingly preparing the American public for a broader conflict, even though, again, he has not sought congressional authorization. And I was just seeing an alert now that says he has no plans to address the nation. So if you're Iran, you're thinking, we could really be in trouble here. What is our best bet at survival? And I've been seeing analysis from colleagues of mine that I think is quite, I think it's worth mentioning here, where they're talking about Iran attacking U.S. bases and facilities in the Gulf, even though Gulf countries have been really pushing the Trump administration to avoid war and to continue in negotiations. So one would think, well, why would, after all of that they've done for you to try to avert war, why would you attack their sovereignty and attack U.S. bases in their countries? And one theory is that Iran believes that the more countries it brings in as taking, sort of absorbing the impact and the risk of what might happen, the better chance it has that it's not completely going at it alone. The more actors it brings into this, the more chance it has of coming out of it somehow unscathed. But the Ayatollah is in hiding, and there are reports that top commanders have been killed already. So I think this is a much more serious situation than the Iranians have faced probably ever when it comes to this regime in particular.
Now, Jasmine, we've been seeing that more news from the Iranian Foreign Ministry that they've been reaching out to Saudi Arabia, to the Qatar, to the other actors in the region, as you just mentioned there, to discuss possible negotiations. But what can the international community do here? Because, Trump walked away from the talks, and again in Venezuela, he had said that he gave Maduro a chance to step down and didn't, and moved in. So, he seems to, be disregarding diplomacy and negotiations. So in the face of that, what can the international community do?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think it's talking about how Donald Trump prefers unilateral military action is only one part of the story. The fact is, he hasn't been held accountable, neither domestically nor internationally. If you look at the statements coming out of Canada, the EU, the head of the EU Parliament, the foreign policy chief, the EU Commission, none of them are putting any onus on the United States or Israel, for that matter, for starting a war for the second time, or basically taking the first step and initiating strikes for the second time in 2 years. All of the statements talk about Iran and Iran's proxies and terrorist activities and so forth, and that all is true. No one is denying that, but there is no accountability for the second time now in 2 years, the U.S. deciding to unilaterally declare negotiations dead and strike without any, like I said, congressional approval, UN consultations, or support from U.S. taxpayers.
Now, Jasmine, as you mentioned there, Donald Trump bypassed Congress, went ahead with this. The reaction, a bit mixed.
Sorry, I can't hear you. I think I lost audio.
Jasmine, are you still with us? Jasmine? Okay.
Sorry, I can't hear you anymore.
Jasmine, thank you so much. I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on. I appreciate you speaking with us today. So I want to bring back our international affairs editor, Andrew Hilliard. So you heard what she was saying there, and we were talking a bit about, Donald Trump campaigned on domestic issues, and he's focused on anything but his first term in office. So, what are we expecting back in the U.S.? Congress upset over this? What kind of reaction do we expect to this military operation?
Well, you're going to, of course, as David Smith, our correspondent in Washington, pointed out, you're going to get a lot of anger coming from the Democrats, who will again say that they have not been properly briefed in the run-up to this military action on what is essentially, warlike action. You will hear, of course, a lot less criticism coming from the Republican aisle. And there is a sense that Donald Trump, in carrying out this military action, that he has essentially done it because he's been emboldened by a string of what he perceives to be operational successes on the battlefield. And each time, we saw it in Venezuela, where there was minimal consultations with Congress. We saw it last June with Operation Midnight Hammer, of course, the US operation to assist Israel in its bombing campaign against Iran's nuclear facilities. Hardly any consultation with Congress. There have been consultations behind closed doors, of course, but not the kind of consultations that you'd expect in the lead up to a military conflict where you have Congress taking part and voting and authorizing the use of military force. That is all the more surprising when you take into account just how big the stakes are here. I mean, you heard it when we listened to Donald Trump's speech outlining his rationale for launching this war. I mean, there were lots of allusions to history, to the injustices that the Iranian regime has meted out to the region, to the world. And what was really striking, one of the most remarkable speeches we've heard from a sitting US president in recent times was the fact that he said openly, kind of prepared his domestic audience for what may lie ahead. He said that US lives could be lost. And as you have mentioned several times, this is, again, someone who campaigned on a promise to end US involvement in foreign wars, to end what he said was US meddling abroad. And what have we seen? Well, we've seen several military campaigns launched by Donald Trump since he took office. The US has intervened in Nigeria. It has intervened in Venezuela. It intervened in Iran last June. Now it is intervening on a very large scale, it would appear, in Iran. We have seen that huge US military buildup in the region, the biggest regional military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 US invasion of Iraq. 2 US carrier strike groups. So 2 US aircraft carriers with the destroyers and all the military assets and hardware that comes with that, warplanes, etc., giving the US that that ability to scale up and to sustain a military operation over the long term. And then what's remarkable here, as we've mentioned time and time again, is the fact that Donald Trump is openly talking of regime change. Again, to reiterate the point, this coming from a president who said that gone were the days of the US launching these foreign wars. Just to remind viewers of what he said during his speech, he encouraged Iranians. Well, he told them to shelter at home during this bombing campaign, but he did openly encourage Iranians to rise up against the regime, telling them that essentially your time has come. You may never get a better opportunity to overthrow this regime. So very warlike language coming from a president who did indeed promise to end foreign U.S. involvement in foreign wars. And of course, a lot of anger from the Democrats in the U.S. accusing Donald Trump of not carrying out the necessary consultations prior to launching these military operations.
Andy, thank you. To some news coming in. Israel's army says it received reports of fallen projectiles in several areas. This after Iran launched several waves of ballistic missiles towards the country. Tehran also launching missiles at U.S. military bases in the region, including those in Qatar, Jordan, and the UAE, and the naval base in Bahrain, as we've been talking about. Most of those were intercepted, but we are beginning to get reports of casualties. One person has been killed in the Iranian strikes on the United Arab Emirates. That's according to the UAE Defense Ministry, as some missile debris fell in a residential area. Israel confirmed today's military action has taken months of close and joint planning with the United States. The IDF says it targeted Iran's essential personnel that are part of plans to destroy Israel, and that its military objective is to degrade Iranian capabilities and remove existential threats to Israel. The Israeli military said it would be calling up about 70,000 reserve soldiers in the coming hours and days, mostly to bolster the country's air defenses, its borders and home defense command. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged Iranians to embrace freedom. Let's listen now.
Together with the US, we will strike hard at the terror regime and create the conditions that will allow the brave Iranian people to rid themselves of this murderous regime. The Iranian people in all their diversity, Persians, Kurds, Azeris, Balochs, Abkhazians, and all other citizens of this wonderful nation, this is your opportunity to establish a new and free Iran. Take your destiny into your own hands.
Earlier, we talked to France 24's Jerusalem correspondent Noga Ternopolsky, and here's what she told us about the situation on the ground.
Israelis were told they could leave the bomb shelters about half an hour ago or so. There's been, I would say, a small but constant response, retaliation from Iran against Israel. So far, we have not seen the massive barrages of missiles that we saw back in June in the 12-day war. We haven't seen 80 missiles launched at once. We've even, on some occasions, seen one missile or 3 missiles. Obviously, these can cost lives and can cause immense damage, but it hasn't yet become the massive attack to which Israelis were told to expect in the case of an Iranian retaliation to a U.S. attack, which is what was expected by most Israelis. The mood here, I would say, is tense and a little bit confused because it was not expected that Israel would be the first to strike. And because the prime minister, in his brief declaration earlier today, basically echoed what Donald Trump had said. And he described this operation, which is likely to cause Israeli lives and to which 100,000 reserve forces have already been called up. He described this as an operation to liberate Iran. Yes, also to protect Israel from what he called an existential threat, but this is a threat he said had been obliterated back in June. So there is a little bit of confusion, and we're going to have to see how things develop over the next few days.
Now, Noga, this Epic Fury operation, it's between the U.S. and Israel, the cooperation there. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, for one, Israel is calling it Roaring Lion. I don't know why. And what we know is that it was a joint attack. This is a really unusual set of circumstances because Israel and the United States are not allied forces under an allied command, such as we saw, for example, at the end of World War II, when forces had joined together under a single hierarchy. It is unclear, for example, to me, despite trying to find out during the day, if the United States and Israel are actually flying sorties together over Iran, or if these are separate operations in targeting different sites in Iran, one Israeli, one American. We know that there's been very, very close consultation between the two countries, and that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is still expected, as far as I know, to arrive here on Monday, breaking the closure of the Israeli airspace, incidentally, that was declared today. But it is an extremely unusual collaboration, and it was just as unusual to hear the Israeli Prime Minister addressing his own people who are exhausted after 2.5 years of war, a war that has not officially ended yet on the Israeli side, basically receiving a Hebrew language translation of the United States message, which is "We're coming in to free you," directed at Iranians.
Now, Noga, are there concerns at this point that Iran-linked militias like Hezbollah or the Houthis in Yemen will take this opportunity to launch fresh attacks?
Absolutely, absolutely, Catherine. So the Houthis already joined one of the attacks today. With Hezbollah, the question is open. Hezbollah did make a sort of half official announcement about 2 days ago saying that if the attack on Iran was to be limited, that it did not expect to join the theater of war. We don't know where things stand now. And Hezbollah is under tremendous pressure from the United States, from France, to disarm completely, to cease its existence as a terror group. And Hezbollah also is still carrying scars from the fact that when Israel attacked Hezbollah, now a year and a half ago or so, and bombed to death its entire leadership in what became known as the Beeper attacks, Iran did not rally to defend Hezbollah. So it's unclear exactly where things stand between Iran and its top regional proxy. But I can tell you that among the 100 or slightly more than 100,000 Israelis called up to the reserves, some are being sent to the Lebanese border, some to the Syrian border. So there is absolutely an active concern about those arenas.
And Noga, I mean, there's been also on the international scene a push for diplomacy here. I understand maybe not everyone in Israel is terribly happy. There might be some protest.
Well, Netanyahu is not a popular leader in Israel, and there have been regular protests against him for most of the length of the whole war. There were protests against him for mismanaging the war and for failing to get the Israeli hostages back. This followed a year of unprecedented protests in Israel ahead of the war that opposed Netanyahu's efforts to perpetrate basically a civilian coup d'etat, to subsume Israel's judiciary under an authoritarian executive, an effort that continues even today. And the protests since the ceasefire has been put into place and the hostages were released have been protests really focused on forcing Netanyahu to call elections, on calling for an end to his almost 20-year hold on power. Now, I think the protests won't take place this evening, but that shouldn't indicate a change of political heart. That it would simply be obeying military orders that have canceled all massive events and have ordered people to remain shelter in place, I would say, to remain close by to bomb shelters until further notice.
France's president says he will hold a defense council meeting in just over an hour here in Paris to discuss the situation in Iran and the Middle East. Emmanuel Macron has also called for an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council. He said the outbreak of a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran has serious consequences for international peace and security. Macron says he spoke separately with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Jordan about the recent developments. On social media, the president wrote that the current escalation is dangerous for everyone and that Iran must understand it has no other option but to engage in good faith negotiations to end its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Let's take a listen to some of his remarks.
The outbreak of war between the United States, Israel and Iran carries grave consequences for international peace and security. At this decisive moment, every measure is being taken to ensure the security of our national territory, our citizens and our interests in the Middle East. France also stands ready to deploy the necessary resources to protect its closest partners should they request it.
The European Union says it's withdrawing all non-essential personnel from the Middle East after describing the developments there as perilous. EU's top diplomat, Koya Kallas, said she was working with Israel and Arab officials to pursue a negotiated peace. The EU recently put fresh sanctions on Iran and leading figures prompting retaliatory sanctions by Tehran. Turkish foreign minister has held talks with his counterparts from Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Syria, Egypt, and Indonesia. The discussions focused on the developments in the region and on possible steps to be taken to help bring an end to the attacks. For more on this, we can cross now to
earlier this morning,
Ankara and join Jasper Morterer, our correspondent in Turkey.
Targets in Iran.
So,
Iran has since launched indiscriminate strikes across the region. I know the British people and communities across our country will be deeply concerned about what this means.
So, Jasper, welcome. Turkey's presidency is saying that the escalating tensions between the U.S., Israel, and Iran are an unacceptable, serious concern for the region. What is Turkey's primary concern in these strikes and counterattacks?
Well, Iran has been saying for months that if it is attacked by America, it would counterattack by firing missiles at US bases wherever they are. Now, in Turkey, the Americans have a large base on the outskirts of Adana city, a large city in the south of the country. It's called Incirlik. And Incirlik reportedly hosts nuclear bombs for the US Air Force. And it's only 10 kilometers from the center of Adana city. So were Iran to target Incirlik, its missiles would only have to be slightly inaccurate for them to hit residential areas of Adana city and inflict civilian casualties. And I'm sure that is Turkey's primary concern in this crisis.
Now, Jasper, what are Turkey's relations with Iran like, and does Iran regard it as an ally or as a hostile?
Well, I think Iran and Turkey enjoy good relations, and I'm sure Iran doesn't regard Turkey as a hostile country. Tehran would see Turkey as a country which does not support what the Israeli government is doing against the Palestinians. I'm sure Iran is pleased by the unsavory comments that President Recep Tayyip Erdogan makes about the Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And I'm sure Tehran also sees Turkey as a country that tries to genuinely mediate regional conflicts. You were talking just now about all the calls that the Turkish foreign minister has been making to foreign ministers in the region and as far as Indonesia. And Turkey is respected for the mediatory role it has taken in the Ukrainian war, for instance. It's often hosted negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians. However, Turkey hosts the Incirlik air base. And I'm sure that with what is going on now, Iran would see the Incirlik base as a legitimate target.
Jasper, thank you so much for keeping us updated, and I guess we'll watch and see if Turkey does have a role to play in negotiations. That's Jasper Mortimer there in Ankara, Turkey. And a recap now of what we've been discussing all day. The U.S. and Israel have launched a coordinated daylight attack on Iran called Epic Fury. It began at 8:10 a.m. local time as Iranians were at work and at school. Airstrikes have hit targets across the country, including near the president and the offices of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in Tehran. U.S. President Donald Trump said this is the beginning of major combat operations against Iran and warned that American lives may be lost as a result. Iran's state media is reporting that one of the missiles launched by the U.S. Israeli attack hit a school in the southern part of the country. An Iranian official said the strike has killed 51 students at a girls' elementary school, and another 60 students have been wounded. The regional governor for Manab County said the death toll could rise. Liza Kamenov has more on what's been happening all day.
Smoke hangs over Tehran's skyline as Iranian media reported explosions across the capital Saturday following a joint US-Israeli strike. The first blasts were heard near the offices of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Security forces were swiftly deployed, blocking all roads surrounding the leader's residence. In a video posted on Truth Social, President Donald Trump confirmed the operation, framing it as a defensive action to protect the United States and its allies.
We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. We are going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world, and we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon.
The strikes follow the US's biggest military deployment to the Middle East in years, a pressure campaign on Iran to stop its nuclear development program. They also follow talks held just 2 days ago between US and Iranian diplomats on Iran's nuclear and ballistic ambitions. In Israel, sirens rang out in cities including Haifa and Jerusalem as authorities declared a state of emergency and warned residents of retaliation, asking them to seek shelter. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed the joint offensive in a video message, calling it an effort to remove what he described as an existential threat posed by Iran.
Together with the US, we will strike hard at the terror regime and create the conditions that will allow the brave Iranian people to rid themselves of this murderous regime. Citizens of this wonderful nation, this is your opportunity to establish a new and free Iran. Take your destiny into your own hands.
Iranian media reported that the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that a first retaliatory wave of missiles and drones has been launched against Israel in response. Sirens have sounded in Jordan and Bahrain, where US military bases and fleets are located, and the US embassies in Qatar, the UAE and Israel have warned staffers and Americans to shelter. Flights have been suspended to Israel, Iran and neighboring countries.
To some news just coming in, Iran's Al-Alam TV is reporting that the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is to give a speech within minutes. This after strikes by the U.S. and Israel targeted top Iranian leaders. Stay with us here on France 24 for this developing story. We'll be back after a quick break.
In the next French Connections, we'll take you to the most populated arrondissement in Paris, the 15th.
Located in the southwestern corner of the capital, this district doesn't boast a lot of tourist attractions. In fact, Parisians love to joke that this residential and family-friendly arrondissement is the least fun of all the arrondissements of Paris.
But while it might not be as trendy or flashy as other parts of town, the 15th is a wonderful example of real, everyday Paris.
Join us in the next French Connections for a tour of the 15e arrondissement de Paris.
French Connections Plus on France 24 and France24.com.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches, bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Thanks for joining us. This weekend. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
understand the world, you need to be immersed in it. From Jakarta to Beirut, by way of Kinshasa, Kyiv and Washington, France 24 correspondents are everywhere. 200 correspondents living near you. Their mission? Keeping you informed wherever you are in the world at all times. Objective, reliable, trustworthy, independent information. Checking facts, exposing fake news. France 24. We're here, there, and everywhere. Keeping you informed.
Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. We start with our developing story. What we know so far is the US and Israel have launched a coordinated daylight attack on Iran called Epic Fury. It began at 8:10 local time as Iranians were at work or at school. Airstrikes have hit targets across the country, including near the president and the offices of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in Tehran. US President Donald Trump said this is the beginning of major combat operations against Tehran and warned that American lives may be lost as a result. Lisa Kaminov.
Smoke. بیتو زدن حرومیا یا اول پس صاف کردن.
The first blasts were heard near the offices of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Security forces were swiftly deployed, blocking all roads surrounding the leader's residence. In a video posted on Truth Social, President Donald Trump confirmed the operation, framing it as a defensive action to protect the United States and its allies.
We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. We are going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world, and we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon.
The strikes follow the US's biggest military deployment to the Middle East in years, a pressure campaign on Iran to stop its nuclear development program. They also follow talks held just 2 days ago between US and Iranian diplomats on Iran's nuclear and ballistic ambitions. In Israel, sirens rang out in cities including Haifa and Jerusalem as authorities declared a state of emergency and warned residents of retaliation, asking them to seek shelter. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed the joint offensive in a video message, calling it an effort to remove what he described as an existential threat posed by Iran.
Together with the US, we will strike hard at the terror regime and create the conditions that will allow the brave Iranian people to rid themselves of this murderous regime. Citizens of this wonderful nation, this is your opportunity to establish a new and free Iran. Take your destiny into your own hands.
Iranian media reported that the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that a first retaliatory wave of missiles and drones has been launched against Israel in response. Sirens have sounded in Jordan and Bahrain, where US military bases and fleets are located, and the US embassies in Qatar, the UAE and Israel have warned staffers and Americans to shelter. Flights have been suspended to Israel, Iran and neighboring countries.
And let's get to Reza Saya joining us live from Tehran. Reza, please tell us what's the latest situation. Do you have an update for us?
Yeah, it is a bleak and grim day here for the people of Tehran, for the people of Iran, a population that has been through so much adversity over the past 5 decades. And this latest adversity is a war started by the world's leading superpower, the United States of America, and the regional power, Israel, both of them nuclear powers, mind you, both of them launching an attack this morning. How is this all going to end? How is the Islamic Republic going to take on these powers? We'll wait and see. Let's tell you what's happening at this minute. It's a little after 6:30 p.m. local time here in Tehran. This is a Saturday, the first day of the work week. Usually 6:30 p.m. On a Saturday, it's rush hour. The streets are bustling with activity, traffic, bumper to bumper, people rushing to get home. But at this point, it's very quiet, eerily quiet. Right behind me is a major freeway here in Tehran, Modarres Expressway. Usually it's packed with people going home. Right now, it is very quiet, a sign that over the past several hours, most people, most Iranians race to get home to be safe with their families, to figure out what's happening. Let's tell you what I observed this morning when the attacks happened. There were reports that the attack started at a little after 8 a.m. local time. The first indications of the attack that I heard came around 9:40 a.m. That's when I was home with my 7-year-old daughter, and I heard 2 or 3 booming explosions. I knew right away what they were. I put my daughter in my car and headed to northern Tehran to take my daughter to her mother for them to be safe. And on my way there, I saw some extraordinary scenes. Many people pouring out into the streets, not knowing what's happening. Many of them looking up at the skies to see if they see anything. Many of them looking at their smartphones. People flagging down motorcycles to get home through the traffic. And one of the most lasting scenes I saw over and over again, parents racing to schools to take home their children, many of whom were in school uniforms. Again, it's a little after 6:30 p.m. The sun has set. According to state media, a number of places were targeted and hit in Tehran, as were other cities throughout Iran. And now the question is, what's going to happen in the coming hours? Are there going to be more attacks? Many Iranians anxiously waiting to see what happens.
Reza, that must have been a very scary situation. You were talking about your daughter there, but I'm also thinking about the Iranian people in general. Did you get any recommendations about maybe taking shelters or how to stay safe?
Well, this is a very densely populated city. There's not a lot of bomb shelters because attacks like this are not common. Interestingly, 2 or 3 hours ago, there was a number of text messages sent by the government. One of them suggested that if Iranians had the opportunity to leave Tehran, that they should. Other text messages called on Iranians to look for any suspicious activity, that if they saw anything suspicious, to call authorities. Other text messages seem to try to calm down people. They told people not to race to supermarkets, to pack up on supplies, reassuring people that supplies, food, whatever that was necessary is going to be available in the coming days. And I think for many Iranians, other than leaving town, they have very few options. Other than waiting to see what the next few hours will bring them.
And any word about fatalities? Any updates on that front?
Listen, the only reports that we're getting is from state media, and the most glaring number of fatalities coming from a city in southern Iran, Minab. That's when state media is reporting that a school was hit by a missile. They're saying at least 20 to 25 students were killed. State media showing some pictures of some remains of some people. We should point out that we haven't independently verified that report, but that's what state media is reporting, that a couple of dozen people killed in a missile attack this morning in Minab, in a city in southern Iran.
Reza Saya, thank you very much for giving us the last update. And also we do have another update as well to bring you. Iran's Al-Alam TV reporting that the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is to give a speech within minutes, and this after strikes by the US and Israeli targeted top Iranian leaders. And there were some questions about the Ayatollah Khamenei's fate. He's about to give a speech. And I'm joined now by Ershad Ali-Jani. Thank you very much for being with us. So Iran was quite prompt to respond, and there were a few attacks in the region.
Yes, Iran started to attack multiple countries, Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, region. I can name, for example, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. And as far as I know, Dubai is under attack right now, and it seems that the regime is using the last card at the very outset of the war, striking across Arab countries in the Persian Gulf. It's a doomsday, the last plan. It's supposed to be a move that would almost inevitably risk forming a broader coalition against them that would normally be a final high-stake escalation. But the fact it has come so early raises a question. Maybe explain the state of the mind of the leaders of the Islamic Republic. I can mention, for example, Hossein Yekta. It's a retired IRGC commander, but he's very close to Ali Khamenei, supreme leader, and his son. And he appeared on the state TV today, and he says that Khamenei has vowed the fight this time will be Ashura-like, and it's a religious term, Shia tradition, and Ashura symbolizes a battle that ends in martyrdom, a stand taken regardless of the cost. Maybe this explains the way that Tehran reacted to the attacks of coalition of Israel and United States.
Okay, thank you, Ali Jenny. We're going to get back to you soon. But first, these are coordinated attacks orchestrated by the US, but also Israel. So let's turn our attention to Jerusalem, where Noga Tolnosky is joining us. So what's going on, Noga?
Hi, Clarice. Well, the rhythm of the Iranian retaliations is definitely intensifying. There are now really sirens after more or less of some sort of a break in the middle of the day. Now, as evening approaches, it's really every few minutes, and the barrages are a little bit larger. So instead of just one missile or three, a few more. So far, Israeli air defenses have succeeded in blocking these missiles, and also a drone that infiltrated into Israel via the Dead Sea area. But I do have some news that there has been the first casualties in Israel. A building in a town adjacent to Tel Aviv, in the town of Bnei Brak, was hit apparently by shards from one of the Israeli interceptor missiles. I'm not sure the distinction is significant for those who were hurt, but there are a number of people wounded, some severely, including a very young girl. So that is the latest out of Israel. And still really no declarations in Israel from the Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, nothing really significant, even from the army, apart from the sort of drone all day long of instructions about remaining near bomb shelters or inside bomb shelters, drinking water and that sort of thing. But we have not heard a real, I would say, clear statement about the anticipated length of this war for Israelis, the hoped for results. It has all remained in this realm of kind of vague pronouncements that we heard from the Prime Minister in a video announcement early this morning, which simply echoed President Trump's statement about the hope to topple the Iranian regime.
So what are the Israeli state of mind? I mean, the war, we're just coming out from a war that dragged on since following the aftermath of the October 7 attack. So I hear there might be some protests.
Well, it's absolutely true. And I in fact, had some doubts when I heard Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement this morning, basically telling Israelis that they were going to have to risk their homes and their lives and their livelihoods in order to free the people of Iran. Of course, all of this based on an understanding that is widely shared in Israel among Israelis, which is that Iran, certainly an Iran with nuclear ambitions, poses an existential threat to Israel. And it's unclear yet. You know, it's been a very quiet Saturday here because everybody's plans were absolutely torn up at 8 in the morning when the first sirens sounded. People have by and large remained in their homes or in their shelters the whole day. There have been comments from the opposition, from the political opposition in Israel, pointing out that as in the United States, the procedure ahead of this operation or war, whatever it will be, Israel is calling it Roaring Lion, were absolutely improper, that there was not a cabinet vote, that there hasn't been a discussion in parliament. All of these norms that have more or less been torn up and shredded by the current government were not observed. But among Israelis who we don't yet know how they will react to this particular operation, there is a widespread understanding that Iran poses a direct threat to Israel.
Any reactions from the opposition?
Yes, there have been reactions from the opposition, including, for example, Labour Party parliamentarian Naama Lazimi, who pointed out what I just said to you, that the procedures ahead of this operation and the even announcements made to the Israeli people were completely inappropriate, improper, and misleading. Israelis, by the way, for the last few weeks have been told in one way or another to expect repercussions against them from a U.S. strike. What was anticipated was that the United States would strike Iran, that it had set all of these assets in motion here in the region, and that Israel would then get the reverberations of such an attack. The surprising part of what happened today is that Israelis awoke to hearing that its own Air Force, that the Israeli Air Force had attacked even before hearing that, in fact, it was a joint U.S.-Israeli attack. More than 100,000 Israeli reserve soldiers have already been called up, not just for air defenses, but also to guard the borders with Lebanon, where Hezbollah appears not yet to have decided how to respond to this attack against its sponsor, to Syria. So I do think it's too early to know exactly how Israelis will respond, but you're right to ask because there is a generalized exhaustion from war in this country.
Nonga, as usual, thank you very much for covering the story for us and following it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tara Kangarloo is a global affairs journalist based in London. Let's turn to her. Tara, welcome. So Donald Trump told Iranians that this was their chance to overthrow the Iranian regime. So what do you think?
Yes, and we have to wait and see how that is going to be possible. And quite frankly, I have no idea what the next few hours hold. I was speaking with a Saudi source who told me nor the method or the policy is clear. The region is on its toes, really, given the fact that the retaliation strikes that we are seeing by Iran is unprecedented. Now, having spoken to people in Iran for the past few weeks covering the deadly protests that you remember earlier in January, many have told me that we will come out on the streets, and that indicates the people's resentment toward the regime and their anger toward what they've done over the years, but also specifically the mass killings that we saw. Now, how is that going to bring about a regime change in a country so vast, so big, where the IRGC is embedded within a host of, factions of the society and holds the ultimate grip and power? I think it's extremely important to see who are the leaders from the regime who have been shot and killed. I think that tells us a lot about the current state of internal affairs in Iran. The Foreign Minister of Iran, Araghchi, was speaking with NBC just minutes ago. He confirmed that the Supreme Leader is alive as far as he knows. But again, there are rumors circulating as to what his faith is. And I know we've been reporting on our air here on France 24 that he might be speaking. So lots at stake. But I will say that the next 48 hours are going to be messy.
So I'm curious, if there is a regime change, so what do you think the scenario will be like? Will it be like the scenario similar to the one, for example, in Venezuela, overthrow the leader and replace it with someone that suitable to the U.S. administration?
and their interests and the Israeli interests. And I think that's a question on everyone's mind. We have to remember that Donald Trump previously said that the regime change in Iran is not on the table. We want to negotiate. And in the middle of negotiations, of course, we saw what happened today. What that regime change looks like is still unclear. If we look at the countries in the region, obviously those attempts were not successful. In the case of Venezuela, extracting one figure and allowing a government that was already in place to lead the country begs the question of how much change does that really entail? And if the Trump administration is keen to do that, who is that de facto leader? There are folks within the country, including people like Larijani, as well as Ghalibaf, two different factions that are very much looking to hold this power. What about Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei? What will happen to him? So a lot of unknown. But what I can tell you is that the regime of Iran is extremely woven. It's an extremely complex apparatus that by eliminating one or two people, it's not going to collapse and it's not going to fall unless there is a plan by the United States in place to fill that void. Otherwise, there will be chaos and a prolonged one. And I will say that listening to Vice President Vance just yesterday, a prolonged war is not what the United States want.
But also many big figures, opponents in exile. Would that scenario be suitable for the Iranian people?
Again, if you're referring to Mr. Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah of Iran, he has managed to garner some following in Iran who truly are supporters of his. But at the same time, there are so many people who support him, not because they necessarily believe in the monarchy, but because they see no other opposition. But at the same time, Iran is not a monolithic country. It's a country of 90 million, and many don't want another monarchy and don't trust him, oftentimes because they know very well that he has the backing of Israel. So the support for Mr. Pahlavi is not unified, but one thing that the Iranian people are united together around is that they no longer want this regime. They want to move beyond the Islamic regime and they no longer believe in any form of reform. Now, the question is, has Mr. Trump decided to bring in Mr. Pahlavi to Iran? And I think that's yet to be seen. But the extent of the support for him varies. But what remains constant is the Iranian people's call on not wanting the Islamic regime.
Thank you very much, Dara Kongalo, Global Affairs journalist out of London. Now, let's get some reactions. Britain, France, and British Prime Minister President Emmanuel Macron are going to discuss the situation. We were supposed to get our correspondent, but I'm told that he's gone and get some shelters. So with the latest that what we have heard so far, what have been your reactions so far?
Reactions of inside Iran?
So yes, about who we're talking about a possible regime change. I mean, that's what the U.S. wants. So what do you think the Iranian people want?
I think they have made it clear that during multiple uprisings through the last decade, I can say since 2009, that the people said and overly and then once again and again they said that they feel that this regime it doesn't represent them and they don't want an Islamic regime in Tehran. In 2009, then 2015, 2017, 2019, Women Life Freedom, and the last one, maybe the biggest one, the massive anti-regime protest all over across Iran that ended up more than 30,000 people protesters were killed by the regime. So I think it's clear that they want to topple the regime. And I want to repeat one of our sources in Tehran told us, and he said that we poured in the street in millions. They killed us by tens of thousands. What we can do more than that. And he was mentioning that maybe they need a foreign intervention out of desperation. So as far as I can see, there is today that there was a public reaction to these attacks that feels markedly different from the 12-day war that the last clash between Iran and Israel. There is, I can say that some people appear quietly satisfied in the videos, that children are laughing. Even in English, they say that I love you, Trump, or women dancing in the streets after they understood that the Khamenei's residence was hit. However, on the other hand, there are queues at the pharmacies, there are queues at bakeries and gas stations. So people are, I think, preparing for a long-term war, something that we did not see last time during the 12 days war.
We were talking about earlier, you heard me talking about Reza Pahlavi, the son of former Shah. So let's hear what he had to say.
هم میهنان عزیزم لحظاتی سرنوشت‌ساز پیش روی ماست.
My dear compatriots in Iran, in these sensitive hours and days, more than any other time, we must remain focused on our final goal, taking back Iran. I want you to stay in your homes for now and maintain your peace and security. Be alert and ready, so that at the appropriate time, which I will inform you of precisely, you return to the streets for the final action.
Be alert and ready.
Yeah. This morning, Reza Pahlavi, hours after the attacks started attacks on Tehran, he published a 3-minute video. He directed to IRGC, Revolutionary Guard apparatus, police agents, and army officers, and he asked them to put down their guns, the weapons, join the people, and
he's acting like this is his moment.
Yes, and I think in somehow it is. He managed to, in some ways, organize the biggest anti-regime protests in early January. And now he asked people to stay at safety, stay at your home until the further notice. Be alert and ready, so that the appropriate time, which I will inform you of precisely, you return to the streets for the final action. So I think he believes that the toppling regime is reachable this time at least.
Well, Reza Pahlavi is not the only opponent. There are also major, strong opponents. So is there a situation where maybe he won't be the one, and people will actually, they don't want him, because he's actually the son of the former Shah?
I think it's a very hard question to answer, because we don't have any reliable statistics from Iran. But as far as I verified hundreds of videos from inside Iran during the latest anti-regime protests in Iran, his name kind of was the only name was mentioned in the streets. But there's no doubt there are other political figures, political leaders that are important. They have some impact on the Iranian society. But it appears that he's the only one that people are getting around him, at least for, as he says himself, for the days after the falling of the regime as a facilitator. And then I suppose that an election or kind of referendum would follow that change that choose the course of the future for the Iranians. But it's hard to answer that question.
All right. Thank you, Arshad. Now, the military operations by the US and Israel in Iran mark the most intense escalation since the 12-day war in June 2025. The strike comes despite ongoing talks between Washington and Tehran over Iran's nuclear program that have been taking place since last June. The latest high-stakes US-Iran nuclear negotiations took place just 2 days ago in Geneva, mediated by Oman, which had ended with a breakthrough. Lisa Kaminov looks at the timeline of diplomatic tensions between the US, Israel, and Iran and the lead-up to Saturday's strikes.
Regional tensions have remained at a breaking point since the 12-day war between Israel, the US, and Iran in June 2025. The conflict ended with a US-brokered ceasefire between Iran and Israel, but the peace was short-lived as tensions began to simmer again. In July, Iran cut ties with the International Atomic Energy Agency. The Iranian foreign minister said the uranium enrichment program would not end. In December, anti-government protests broke out across Iran. US-Iran tensions soared again as President Trump repeatedly threatened to intervene militarily if Iran continued to kill protesters or resumed its nuclear program.
Well, I told him two things. Number one, no nuclear. And number two, stop killing protesters.
This came as the US deployed its biggest military presence to the Middle East in years, sending thousands of troops, aircrafts and warships to the region, a pressure campaign to force Tehran to abandon its nuclear and ballistic missile agenda.
We have a lot of very big, very powerful ships sailing to Iran right now, and it would be great if we didn't have to use them.
In early February, indirect talks mediated by Oman began in Geneva to curb Tehran's nuclear program, despite a third round of high-level talks concluding on Thursday without a deal. Iran's foreign minister claimed the meetings were successful.
We made good progress after several hours of intensive negotiation. We've started serious discussions about elements of a deal, both in the field of nuclear issues and the removal of sanctions.
But Donald Trump was far less satisfied, growing impatient and frustrated, giving a final ultimatum. If Iran failed to reach a deal, he would order a strike far worse than those in June last year.
We're not exactly happy with the way they negotiated. They cannot have nuclear weapons, and we're not thrilled with the way they're negotiating, so we'll see how it all works.
As the talks in Geneva wrapped up, Tehran doubled down on state TV, indicating it would not meet Trump's demands. Though a follow-up round was set for Vienna next week, the US president warned of the risk of a prolonged conflict just 1 day before Saturday's strikes took place.
Now let's talk about the reactions from Europe. Britain, France, and Germany called for resumption of US-Iran negotiations and condemned Iranian attacks on countries in the region, falling short, actually, of commenting US and Israeli attacks on Iran. So let's bring Dave Keating, live from Brussels. Dave, so is there a united front for European response?
Well, there's unity in relative silence, you could say. So we've had these statements from European leaders which are focusing on the urgency of the current situation without making a judgment on the American-Israeli attacks on Iran. The majority of European leaders have really not commented on, let's say, the legality of these attacks. We've had a number of EU leaders praising the US attacks, only one national leader in Europe has condemned the attacks as a violation of international law, and that is Spain's Pedro Sanchez. We had the EU High Representative Kaja Kallas saying that the situation is perilous and warning against an escalation. That's really where the Europeans are focusing right now, because they have a lot of citizens in the Gulf area that they're now needing to, for the moment, tell to shelter in place, and they're now making moves toward evacuating those citizens because, of course, Iran is now attacking U.S. assets in those Gulf countries, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, and so there's obvious concerns about EU citizens there. Now, I've just attended a speech by the new Dutch Prime Minister, Rob Jetten. This was a pre-planned speech, but he opened the speech with words about what has happened in Iran, and he too echoed this European line of warning against escalation. So the main line right now from Europe is warning against escalation, first and foremost targeting Iran, telling them to stop bombing those Gulf countries, but by implication also warning against a U.S. escalation. I don't think the U.S. is going to be listening to the Europeans on this, though.
And French Emmanuel Macron is to hold a meeting of the French Defense and National Security Council to discuss the situation. Let's listen to what French President said earlier today. So we were supposed to listen to French President, but so what else do you know about this meeting?
Sure, I can sum up what he said. So France is calling for an extraordinary meeting of the UN Security Council. It's not clear whether or not that's actually going to happen, but France is really pushing for some urgent planning by other parties to try to stop this from escalating. On the EU side, President Ursula von der Leyen has called for a meeting of the top commissioners involved in defense for Monday. Meanwhile, EU national ambassadors are going to be meeting either tonight and tomorrow. I'm not sure. Originally, we heard that they were going to meet tonight. Now I'm hearing they actually won't meet till tomorrow. But that is also very, very much being pushed by France and also Germany to get this meeting of all the EU ambassadors together to try to agree a common line on this. I mean, the common line, the most we can expect from that will be a common line on calling for non-escalation. We're not going to get any criticism of the United States and Israel's attacks for sure, and we're not going to get any common line on praising the U.S. attack either. So there's going to try to be some coordination here also on how to protect Europe's allies in the Gulf from Iranian attacks. Like I said, that's really the main focus right now.
And now you're ready to hear about what French President Emmanuel Macron said earlier today.
The outbreak of war between the United States, Israel and Iran carries grave consequences for international peace and security. At this decisive moment, every measure is being taken to ensure the security of our national territory, our citizens, and our interests in the Middle East. France also stands ready to deploy the necessary resources to protect its closest partners should they request it.
So, are we still with Dave? Okay, no. Let's bring in my colleague. So Dave Keating, so apparently he's still with us. So Dave, what's your reaction to that statement?
Well, I think that the Europeans are in a difficult situation here because on one hand, this is probably a violation of international law. So they don't want to go too far ahead in praising it. But at the same time, of course, there is no love lost between European governments and the regime in Iran, who all European governments are not friends with. So they don't want to be seen in any way of trying to protect or defend the regime in Iran, but a lot of them are also wary of going too far here in praising what could be a violation of international law. We saw the same thing happen when the U.S. attacked Venezuela, the Europeans trying to skirt this line. So when we hear that European leaders they're reaching out to their allies in the region, which includes Israel, I believe the Chancellor Merz has had a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, again trying to assure them that they can be protected, and in particular that EU citizens, European citizens that are in those Gulf countries and in Israel, the European allies, can be protected for now, shelter in place, and perhaps moves toward evacuation.
And there was also some reactions from Germany. The Chancellor Friedrich Merz talked on the phone to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Exactly, yeah. So we're seeing coordination now with the allies. We know that European leaders have also reached out to the leaders of the Gulf countries, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, because they are right now under attack by Iran. Now, Iran is targeting U.S. military bases in those countries, but of course that means the closure of airspace. There have been unconfirmed reports that people on the ground may have been hit. These attacks have been intercepted, we understand, for the most part by U.S. anti-missile technology, but still it may be the case that some of the debris, once those missiles get intercepted, can fall to the ground and injure people. This is also the case, obviously, for Israel. In the past, we saw that Iran struck back at Israel as well when these attacks happened. So, of course, we have the Iron Dome in Israel that is meant to protect people from attacks like this. It doesn't always go as planned, though. So right now, people are sheltering in place. And I think one of the things that European leaders will be talking about with the leaders in this region is how to protect civilians as much as possible as this continues.
And it was to point out that British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Macron, and German Chancellor Merz, they were quick to point out that they did not take part in these strikes.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the delicate balance they're trying to strike here, because they don't want to be seen as completely endorsing these strikes, but they also don't want to criticize them. So they're trying to figure out a way, I think, to have it both ways here. But like I said, there have been European leaders that have praised these strikes as a necessary action against the Iranian regime because they have continued to pursue nuclear weapons. Again, as we have this meeting, when we have this meeting tomorrow, or maybe tonight, of EU national representatives, maybe they'll try to agree some common line on this. We'll see. If there is a common line, we will see that expressed by the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas.
And the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer also reacted. So what's specific between the relationship between the two countries with the UK, including the UK?
Yeah, so the UK has, again, told its citizens to shelter in place in these Gulf countries. I think also the citizens in Israel. We actually that was one of the first indications that this was about to happen, that the US State Department told US citizens in Israel to brace for impact, essentially. And so, again, these talks between Keir Starmer and the leaders in the region, of allies in the region, are very much focused at this point on protecting civilians, and in particular on protecting their own citizens, of which there are a lot in these countries, especially in the Gulf countries. There are a lot of Europeans who live in these countries who are right now going to be feeling very, very anxious as Iran is raining missiles toward them.
Thank you very much. And we can see now some live pictures where there was a strike in central Israel. So let's bring in Shirley Sitbon. So what else can you tell us about these pictures?
Well, yes, the Israelis, they've spent much of the day indoors in shelters, but then they could also get out briefly because most of the missiles that were fired towards Israel were shut down by, all these defense systems intercepted by the U.S. Forces in the region, and also the Israeli forces. They're saying in Israel that the war in June, the 12-day war, has taught much to the Israelis and the Americans about how to react to the Iranian response, because it's not really attacks, since Israel attacked in June and then Iran responded with all these missiles. And there was a lot of damage, much more than in other wars. So the Israelis and the Americans really learned as much as possible from that war. And they also used that war to destroy not only nuclear sites, but also a lot of missiles, launchers. And so that's why perhaps also they believe that Iran has less capacities now to react to the attack by Israel and the U.S. Towards Israel, because it doesn't have they believe, perhaps large capacities, or it's still waiting to use them, not using them right away. But yes, the Israelis basically feel that for now, the damage has not been as bad as they could have dreaded, and the interceptions were carried out well for them. But yes, that's just the beginning of a war that will last at least for several days. We don't know really what's up next, but yes, so the Israelis spending many days in their shelters. But yes, most of the damages in Israel were caused by after interceptions, when the remains of missiles and interceptors fell on the ground, and that's why even when there is an interception, people are called to remain indoors.
Remain indoors, and I just point out that Noga earlier was saying that actually there's word of a first casualty.
Okay.
So was that a surprise? I mean, this operation has been clearly planned for a long time.
Yes.
In the middle of negotiations,
absolutely.
I must say.
I mean, of course, for several weeks, that's just the minimum that we can imagine, because we've seen the chief of staff, the military chief of staff of Israel, going to Washington, talking to U.S. commanders. U.S. commanders going to Israel. It's no secret. They said openly that they were planning something, but the U.S. Has been saying that its goal is to negotiate a deal that would allow to diffuse what it believed as being a threat without going into a military operation. We always can imagine that that's just words, and that they were in fact planning this all along and waiting to have this major, so many weapons on the ground in the region so they can launch the war. But many believe that Donald Trump indeed has no interest in waging a war if he can get to basically the same goals without holding a war. But the Israeli prime minister and his government, which is very right-wing, they didn't believe in negotiations from the beginning, and of course, if the regime had said we're giving up, we're stepping down, they would have accepted it. Of course, that's just a fantasy for Israelis. But Benjamin Netanyahu, his government, they believed that strikes for them, a war, was the only way to just, for them, seize the opportunity and get rid of what they see as a threat. Meanwhile, the Americans were, I believe, trying to negotiate also something, hoping not to get there. And you can listen to some of the words used recently, which showed that the Americans were trying to sell this to their public, because the voters of Donald Trump were extremely against wars, this one and others. And in recent days, we heard Marco Rubio, for example, saying that even the ballistic missiles, the U.S. is the target as well, not just Israel, even though the U.S. is far away, because there are all the U.S. bases in the region. So they didn't mention much Israel in recent weeks. They're saying this is a threat to the U.S., perhaps trying to, and Donald Trump didn't reference much Israel today, trying perhaps to sell this to American voters, to Republicans, to tell them that this is justified in some way. Of course, there's a lot of criticism among voters who do not want to see more wars.
But what do you think about the timing? After Ashran, I'll give you the... We were making, and I quote, significant progress. And I know that the tone, U.S.-American tone, was quite hardened these recent days. But we were making, and they said, at least the Iranians said, we were making significant progress. So I'm a bit surprised about the timing of this.
Well, we didn't really have much of the details of the progress they were talking about. And indeed, when the Omani foreign minister talked about significant progress, and the Iranians as well, the Americans did not say that, although some official who talked to the press said that there has been some progress.
And there was some concession that was also declared, I believe, yesterday about the enrichment of the uranium enrichment. That they said, okay, we're going to pause it.
Well, for the Americans, and even when this was announced, right away you could see different ways of analyzing this, because you could see the difference even among the wires, because, well, the declaration was extremely optimistic. Well, some wires were already saying, well, what we see on the table is no deal, and that there's still gaps. So even if there's progress, it's still maybe a gap that's too big for Americans, and all of the weapons and everything is there. All of the military are in the region. So this is extremely, this shows that a war is imminent. It could be there tomorrow, and indeed it has been launched. And when I looked at the Israeli press on that day, when everyone was a bit optimistic, well, they said it looks optimistic, but in fact, it's going to implode in a few days. You'll see it. I was talking about this here in the studio, saying, see, they're so pessimistic. I mean, that's their analysis. Well, indeed, for the Americans, it just wasn't enough, apparently, or this was the plan all along.
It's just a quick reaction.
I just want to raise the point that the negotiations were about the nuclear activities of Iran. But if you look at the military action of the United States, and even the words that they came after followed this military action against Iran, is clear that the target is regime change. What they hit, I can categorize in two categories: military and political. The militaries are clear; they are. The attacks concentrated on the west and south of Iran, on the missile sites and military bases, on the Persian Gulf shores, so that they can dismantle this defense lines of Iran to go further inside. But there is another category of these attacks under the political targets. They have targeted Pezeshkian, they have targeted Ali Khamenei. So if they want to say, okay, we give up everything, they kill, or at least try to kill the decision makers. Khamenei could take that decision. He was targeted. We don't know what's his fate, but he was targeted. Or Pezeshkian, who was targeted. And then Trump came and says that all I want is freedom for the Iranians. And since this morning, we don't hear anything about any nuclear facilities being targeted. They are either military to dismantle the defense lines, and the political. Even the former president Ahmadinejad resident was attacked.
No, absolutely. That was very clear from Donald Trump's statement right away. It was made no mystery about it. Yeah. So yes, but until this morning, the Americans were talking about not just the nuclear, the ballistic, the proxies. They were not mentioning, of course, the negotiations, obviously, a regime change. But yes, this is a very dramatic shift in the way they speak about this, because they've always said that, that you can't, it's impossible. They don't want to get inside. They don't want soldiers on the ground. So they know that they can't change a regime with strikes even for several days. So this is really something that's unprecedented, saying that they're starting a war and then they're counting on other people, on the population of Iran to, we don't know what what can they do to overrun the regime? I mean, it's not clear at all. It's from as far as I know, it's unprecedented, a very uncertain plan, or they're not giving out their plans and they're planning something else, or they're planning a longer war, just with giving those statements, which can give us a false idea of what their plan is, what they're doing on the ground.
Well, the plan was probably clear when American forces they had been building up in the region for months. Here's a closer look on the U.S. military presence in the region by Caroline Baum.
U.S. military forces have been deployed to the Middle East in numbers not seen since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Over 12 U.S. warships are positioned across the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Gulf of Oman, including the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford, the largest and most modern vessel in the U.S. fleet. Both of these massive aircraft carriers are crewed by thousands of sailors and hold dozens of warplanes. It's rare for the two to be in the Middle East at the same time. Analysis of satellite images has also shown an increase in U.S. warplanes across the region since the beginning of the year. Washington has long held a strong military presence in the Middle East, with the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command headquartered in Bahrain, and several permanent bases in Kuwait, including Camp Arif Jan, the U.S. Army headquarters for the Central Command, and the Ali Al Salam Air Base. The massive El Udeid Air Base in Qatar holds the U.S. Central Command's Air and Special Operations Forces, while the Al Jafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates holds the U.S. Air Force hub for advanced air warfare training. The U.S. also holds numerous non-base military positions, notably in Syria and Iraq. While ground forces are expected to stay out of the fighting, tens of thousands of personnel are stationed across these sites, making the U.S. potentially vulnerable to a close-range counterattack from Iran or its proxies. Despite this threat, armed groups allied with Tehran, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, have largely been weakened.
Surely.
Yes, well, the Israeli chief of staff just talked in saying that these, he doesn't say a war, but he says these operations, this event will be significant, which, I mean, is not the same thing as we've been hearing this morning. I mean, we have then to try and understand what's going on. Of course, we don't have many elements, but will it last several days, several weeks? We have no idea. But yes, all the forces are there. We're just getting this minute by minute. When you look at the Israeli media talking about this, they're, you know, we were getting different information regarding the fate of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, because while in the Iranians, as far as I've seen, the foreign minister has spoken saying that as far as he knows, he's well and alive. The Israelis have been reporting for hours that they believe that he has been killed. So yes, this information, in a way that seems almost like it's been done, also giving information about Saudi Arabia, saying that it has joined the war. So yes, a lot more caution when you're looking at every reaction from every country. The words have significance, and that's not what the Saudis have been saying as far as I've seen. They've been criticizing the fact that the country has been attacked by Iran when Iran retaliated against the American and the Israeli attacks, strikes. But it has not seen, as far as what I've seen, that it's joining a war against Iran. I've not seen anything like that. So the press sometimes giving out information that's not always as genuine as it is, because every word has significant weight. We're in this sensitive situation.
Well, the story is still developing. Thank you very much. Let's take a short break.